Dear friends, welcome to the last section of today's conference, which is talking about the topics that appeared in the Constitution of the Second Vatican Council, Gaudium and Spes. And this block, or thematic section, is focused on the reflection, actualization of the global dimension. We will talk about things like international relations, global development, security, and similar questions. Our guests, afternoon guests, are three guests: theologians, politologists, focused on these topics. As the first one, I would like to introduce our guest from the longest distance, Professor Shaji Kochuthara from India, who works in the Pontifical Academy, Philosophy, Theology and Church Law in India and Bangalore. He is a priest, Romano-Marian Catholic Church, and a member of the Order of Carmelitans of Virgin Mary. He is interested in theological ethics, and he is the editor of a theological magazine, Asian Horizons. Welcome. As the second lecturer in this block, there will be Mr. Marián Sekerák, who is at the Faculty of Social Sciences at Charles University in Prague, but his homeland is Slovakia. He is interested in political theory, political philosophy, international relations and democracy of the Italian Sea. He wrote a monography, theological monography, that was issued in Banská Bystrica in 2013. He is interested in the theory of participation and deliberative and their applications, current applications. Political topic, very interesting. Welcome, dear friend. And as the last guest, I would like to introduce Dr. Míčka, who is a lecturer in the Department of Charity, Psychology and Ethics, and he is interested in social ethics. He is a member of Czech Academy, a social bishop conference, a member of Czech Society of Political Sciences. Welcome. And now we will ask the first lecturer, Shaji George Kochuthara.
Dear friends, especially Roman and Marián, good evening. I am honored by the invitation to participate in this conference and to present a paper. At the very outset, I would like to express my gratitude to the organizers of the conference and especially to Professor Roman Míčka. Introduction. Though the term globalization was in use before Vatican II, as far as its current meaning is concerned, the concept is of later origin, only in the 1970s. Thus, in Gaudium et Spes, or in the other documents of Vatican II, we do not find references to globalization as we speak of it today. However, GS Gaudium et Spes visualizes the need of an interconnected world where all are related to each other in fraternity and solidarity. In this paper, drawing inspiration from GS and subsequent church documents, we shall analyze globalization, especially from the perspective of the developing world. Many of the concrete references given will be from Indian situation, but similar situations can be found in other parts of the world. GS reflects on the meaning of human existence and activity in this world. Salvation comes not by fleeing from the world, but by engaging the world inspired by faith. Although GS deals with economic, social, cultural, national and international life, it is not basically a socio-political economic document. Its vision is basically theological. The church is above all trying to scrutinize the signs of the times and of interpreting them in the light of the gospel, guided by the conviction that faith throws a new light on everything, manifests God's design for man's total vocation. Only man's, the document is not so gender sensitive, and thus directs the mind to solutions which are fully human. So, when we look into GS and subsequent documents, we are not looking primarily for new sociological and economic theories, but we are trying to understand and interpret the world and the developments in it in the light of faith. Globalization. It is difficult to define globalization. In his book, Globalization and Its Discontents, ex-World Bank economist Joseph Stiglitz defines it as the removal of barriers to free trade and the closer integration of national economies. However, globalization is not a mere economic phenomenon, it is also social, cultural, and political. Considering globalization as the cause of all problems seems to be over-pessimistic. Similarly, presenting globalization as a panacea for everything seems to be too optimistic. In general, in India, the new generation who are employed in IT and allied sectors are strong proponents of globalization, whereas many employed in agriculture, the poor, and those working for social welfare are its critics. Globalization and economic development. Can a country like India, a developing country, develop without globalization? Narayana Murthy, he is the founder of Infosys, perhaps the second largest IT firm in the world, argues that in India, every year, 45 to 50 million people have to find new jobs, and embracing globalization is the only solution for this. After independence, India had adopted a semi-socialist economic policy. In 1991, a new economic policy of liberalization was adopted. The positive effects of this new policy are seen in the increase in GDP, growth rate, foreign direct investment, foreign exchange, and outsourcing. India is often presented as one of the fastest growing economic powers. However, there are also negative effects of liberalization and globalization, namely growing unemployment, widening disparities, neglect of agriculture, and widespread poverty. According to a 2005 World Bank estimate, 41.6% of the total Indian population falls below the international poverty line of US $1.25 a day. The Planning Commission of India estimates that there are 407.4 million persons below the poverty line in 2010-11. Poverty has existed in India even before the onset of liberalization and globalization. But what is pertinent to consider is that the growth in GDP is, in the recent decades, an argument in favor of globalization is not reflected in the life of a big number of people, indicating the widening gap between the poor and the rich. Similarly, it is pointed out that in the recent years, the number of unemployed persons has increased. Agricultural sectors have suffered a lot due to globalization. The agricultural land of small farmers is taken to create special economic zones. Since subsidies are reduced or removed, many are unable to continue farming. Thousands of farmers have committed suicide in the last few years. In the state of Gujarat alone, the state which is often presented as the model of development, more than 16,000 farmers committed suicide in the last 10 years. The present Prime Minister was the Chief Minister in Gujarat for 10 years. Globalization claims to promote economic growth by attracting international investors by freeing up markets. Foreign businesses are supposed to create new employment opportunities. The flip side is that large global corporations often destroy local competition and homegrown industries. For example, Coca-Cola and Pepsi have wiped out many local soft drink manufacturers all over the world. If competition is the only norm, the small-scale industries and firms do not succeed. Rather, they are annihilated. Globalization and economic solidarity. Globalization offers great potentialities for development through trade and financial ties between nations and distribution of capital and wealth. Advancement in technology, communication, media, and removal or relaxing of international trade barriers have made a global community possible. Though this growing interconnectedness of people around the globe is a very welcome sign, sharp inequalities, exploitation, domination, oppression, and corruption continue in different forms. Inequalities between developed countries and developing countries shoot up. Even within the developed countries, inequalities augment. Poverty is relatively on the increase. As GS has pointed out, while an immense number of people still lack the absolute necessities of life, some, even in less advanced areas, live in luxury or squander wealth. In the beginning, many people in countries like India were apprehensive that globalization is a form of economic colonialism. People in developed countries were rather enthusiastic about globalization. But now, a good number of people in the developed countries do not seem to be so enthusiastic about it, especially since the economic recession. Millions of people in the developed countries have lost their job as many firms shifted their production units to other countries where labor is cheap. To be added to this are millions of jobs outsourced. Arguably, a number of people in the countries where production units are opened and jobs are created benefit. But often the multinationals enter into deals with the local governments to get their own terms accepted. Thus, though many people in the developing countries benefit, the profit of the multinational firms has increased enormously, and this growth is without any solidarity, since they are not accountable to anyone, either in their home countries or in the countries where they have opened their units. As a result, the development is largely the development of big firms. This lack of solidarity reinforces inequalities, injustice, exploitation, and subsequently poverty and suffering. Unless globalization attends to this, it will turn into a globalization of indifference, as Pope Francis has repeatedly warned. Imbalances and inequality in development make the poor poorer. Take, for example, the city of Bangalore, which is known as the IT hub of India. I'm in Bangalore, actually. Tens of thousands of people have found jobs in software companies and BPO, which offer them very good salaries. But a good number of people are employed in low-income sectors. Many do not have a secure job or any job at all. there are number of people who earn more than 100,000 rupees per month. But in the same city, there are hundreds of thousands of people who earn just 2,000 rupees. Often, that is the income for the whole family. With the economic boom in the city, food, housing, education, healthcare, etc. have become very costly. In short, the so-called development in the globalization period has not improved the life of the poor. Rather, their life is rendered more miserable. All this make clear that free trade alone is not enough to ensure social justice. The economy needs ethics in order to function correctly. Not any ethics whatsoever, but an ethics which is people-oriented. The World Commission on the Social Dimension of Globalization underscores that the governance of globalization must be based on universally shared values and respect from human rights. It acknowledges that globalization has developed in an ethical vacuum, where market success and failure have tended to become the ultimate standard of behavior, and where the attitude of winner takes all weakens the fabric of communities and societies. Any economic system and developmental programs should recognize the centrality of the human person. As GS has emphasized, the fundamental finality of this production is not the mere increase of products, nor profit or control, but rather the service of man, and indeed of the whole man. Only if globalization is based on the principle of solidarity, it will ensure justice and distribution of wealth. Otherwise, it will only intensify and perpetuate injustice on the global level. GS has underscored the need of sharing in justice and charity. God destined the earth and all it contains for all men and all peoples, so that all created things would be shared fairly by all mankind under the guidance of justice tempered by charity. Though this was said before the onset of globalization, this vision of sharing in justice is especially relevant in the context of globalization, because peace for all of us comes from the justice of each of us. Injustice done anywhere in the globalized world will adversely affect peace, harmony, and development in any other part of the world. The kingdom of God envisions a human society that lives in solidarity, a human society that lives as a family where God is the Father of all and all are brothers and sisters. The development of peoples depends, above all, on a recognition that the human race is a single family working together in true communion. Competitiveness and profit should not alienate the market from the solidarity with the human family. Only a civilization of love can ensure this. Corruption, globalization, and neoliberalism. I do not argue that corruption is the invention of globalization, but globalization has given new faces to corruption. A study published in November 2010 by Global Financial Integrity, an international advocacy group, says that corruption in India has increased considerably after liberalization. As Arundhati Roy, a famous writer and novelist, has said, as the disparity between the richer and the poor grows, the fight to corner resources is intensifying to push through their sweetheart deals. Corporate globalization needs an international confederation of loyal, corrupt, authoritarian governments in poorer countries. This is yet another proof that an economy without ethics, in which profit and success at any cost are the only norms is disastrous and does not lead to real development. Globalization and solidarity with cultures. Though globalization proposes interconnectedness of all, why does it face resistance from various cultures? Globalization has an inherent tendency to bring homogeneity, not only in business and trade worldwide, but also in socio-cultural and religious life. Here, the culture of the dominant or influential groups and countries become normative. Consequently, the indigenous cultures feel threatened. Many cultures consider globalization as a form of neo-colonialism, as another attempt of conquering and destroying their cultures. Influence on local values and cultures may happen through consumer goods and lifestyle. For example, many in India seem to fear that globalization is a threat to the values of Indian culture, especially those regarding family and sexuality. The increasing reach of the global media, entertainment, and tourism industry is placing stress on traditional cultures and on the values, sense of identity, and solidarity of local communities. This fear of cultural invasion is one of the reasons behind the rise of fundamentalism and terrorism in many places. Cultural leveling and indiscriminate acceptance of types of conduct and lifestyles are harmful to the profound significance of the culture of different nations, of the traditions of the various peoples by which the individuals defines himself in relation to life's fundamental questions. The vision should not be of a global homogeneous culture, but a global community that accommodates the multitude of local cultures. Globalization, to be acceptable, must respect the uniqueness of cultures and engage in healthy dialogue rooted in solidarity. Globalization in solidarity with ecology. It will not be just to hold globalization responsible for all the ecological problems. However, globalization has heavily intensified the trends that endanger ecology and has introduced new elements. Often, the multinational companies, which manage to influence and even dictate government policies, easily ignore the havoc done to ecology. Rapid growth of economy demanded by the market requires rapid expansion of infrastructure and resource extraction. Norms to safeguard the ecology are sacrificed to make a friendly climate for investment. Extensive areas of land have been given for mining to national and multinational corporations, leading to the destruction of agricultural land and forests. Moreover, developing countries like India are used by the developed countries to dump hazardous waste materials. Another area of concern is tourism. Ecologically sensitive areas have been opened up for tourism. Bangalore, the city where I live, was known as the Garden City of India. Many would say that it has become a garbage city. Consequently, the city suffers from air and water pollution, frequent traffic blocks, lack of open space, scarcity of water, and so on. Evidently, these are not problems that India alone faces. Unbridled competition and unscrupulous demands in the market lead to the exploitation of natural resources at the cost of the environment. However, the developing and poor nations are more severely affected. Globalization needs a developmental model based on the sustainability of the ecological system, the genuine needs of the human society, respect for the whole nature, and the needs of the present as well as future generations. Laudato Si speaks at length of the dangers of the technocratic paradigm, which leads to the planet being squeezed dry beyond every limit. One important concern is solidarity and justice in the use and distribution of energy resources. Caritas in Veritate points out that hoarding of non-renewable energy resources by some states, power groups, and companies poses a grave obstacle to development in poor countries. Solidarity also demands lowering of energy consumption from the part of the technologically advanced societies. Globalization solidarity, a few proposals. The ways and means of expressing solidarity may be varied depending on the particular context and needs. Some of the proposals given by experts and world leaders in this regard may be helpful. 1. Goods are to be shared without excluding anyone. 2. International organizations should ensure just prices in trade. On essential goods, subsidies are to be granted to poor nations. Similarly, poor sections within the nations are to be offered special subsidies. Preferential choice for the poor is an essential element of solidarity. 3. Specially to be mentioned is the obligation of the developed countries to help the poorest. 4. Unless the rich nations are willing to express their solidarity with the poor nations by cancelling their external debts, practically it will be impossible for these nations to find the path of development. 5. In spite of the great services rendered, it is not rare that international organizations like UN, WTO, IMF serve the interests of the rich and the powerful only. These organizations have to become more representational. The present structure of the UN Security Council cannot be considered democratic. 6. Patent regulations which control the production of essential goods and their prices are to be reconsidered. This is acutely felt in the case of life-saving and essential medicines. 7. Globalization should respect the cultures and religions of people without imposing its homogeneous culture. Concluding remarks. As an ideal of interconnectedness of peoples, nations and cultures, globalization offers great possibilities. To realize this, globalization has to be rooted in the principle of solidarity, especially with the poor, the cultures, and ecology. Globalization should not be, first of all, about money, market, or competition, but about people and their interconnectedness in a world which has to become one human family. Economic prosperity will lead to long-lasting peace and development only if it ensures justice to all. Thank you.
Rozvoj pouze tehdy je zajištěna spravedlnost pro všechny. Děkuji vám. Děkujeme Shajimu. As the next one, Dr. Sekerák will read his text. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, good evening. The first day there were Czech language, German language, English, and I'd like to complete this mosaic with Slovakian language. And before I will present it, which is focused on the theory of global governance, in the inside Catholic social doctrine, I'd like to thank the organizers that the other discussion will be also friendly and expert as so far. The academic spirit, open spirit, is very different from in the discipline that I'm focused on, in the field of politics. When I was yesterday, the hot politics, when I witnessed and was informed about quite strong reaction of our Slovak premier to one of my commentary, and he felt a little bit stressed. I want to talk about today, which is connected with politics, with the sphere of religion, spirituality, social Catholic teaching, but also in the international relations. The information I want to present are possible to be found in the article which was published in Catholic Journal in the Perspective section. At present, in the period when, for example, the USA, as the biggest military power and important debtor, world debtor, in the period when the European Union is fighting with the problem of economic instability of some states, with the problem of immigrants, terrorism problem, in the period when we in fact are discussing the reformation of a United Nations organization, we see that there is the absence of a global authority that could regulate or at least have a decisive word in the framework of international problems. Because even these entities I mentioned, these international actors, USA, European Union, are not able to become these authorities. This political vacuum is fulfilled. Italian See Vatican or the Pope using the soft power, and they become a global moral authority. In spite of this, Catholic Church shows a coherent and still and not finished and not fully elaborated of global governance, public political authority. I would like to talk about in detail. This conception is placed into the framework of Catholic social doctrine, which has its own encyclica Levatrina Novarum from the end of the 19th century, and this is not very well known. We see the beginnings of this teaching in the encyclic of the Benedict of the IV Vix Pervenit from the half of the 18th century. This encyclical was called Usury, about the profit, but it was addressed to the bishops of Italy. It was not in general a document as cathedra for the whole church. I have a lot of experts here, so I don't want to talk in detail about other milestones of this concept. I will mention some encyclicals: Mater et Magistra Pacem Interis, Paul VI Populorum Progressio, St. John Paul II Laborem Exercens, or the newest encyclical Laudato Si, or the encyclical of Benedict XVI, Caritas in Veritate. Of course, the most important place is also the document Gaudium et Spes we are talking about, but an important role here is played by compendium of the social doctrine of the Church, which is referred to by Francis. Despite that this list is quite long, the first mentioning of the concept of global governance, we'll find the first mentioning in this mentioned the encyclic of St. John Pacem Interis, and in this document the Pope calls for the international authority that should be on the common consent of the people of all nations and not imposed by force, national or international. The establishment of such an authority should be the most proper answer to many of the global problems of these times. And we know that these problems actually persist until now. From a theoretical point of view, his conception of international public authority should be included in the political or institutional type of cosmopolitanism. The proponents of this kind of cosmopolitan theory assume that the exercise of justice requirements should be vested, guaranteed into the hands of global political institutions with a legitimate coercive power. From this political philosophical point of view, that's his concept. It's interesting that the Pope, in his concept of the general authority, counts on equipping such an authority with worldwide power. Unfortunately, the Pope remains unclear what such a worldwide power means and what mechanisms of its exercise should be adopted. We can only guess that such a worldwide authority was his specific response to the Cuban Missile Crisis of the 1962. It's evident that the Pope, in his intervention during the Cuban Missile Crisis, he could be blamed that he preferred an actor, but as we know that his intervention addressed to both then relevant statesmen, but he urged those responsible for the fate of the nations for negotiations. It should work with, it should operate with fairness, absolute impartiality, and with dedication to the common good of all peoples. The Pope put a difficult task ahead of the public authority to evaluate and find a solution to economic, social, political and cultural problems which affect the universal common good. These kinds of problems, according to him, are considered too difficult for the rulers of individual states to solve with any degree of success because of their extreme gravity, vastness and urgency.
Vzhľadom na významnú alebo extrémnu závažnosť a urgentnosť týchto problémov. Po tom, čo významný
It is noteworthy that the situation does not appear to be very different 50 years later.
Prichádza už slávna
Later there comes a very famous constitution, Gaudium et Spes, which gives a very brief highlights of the concept of the public authority. Unlike the Pope, the authors of the constitution identify the real purpose of such an authority in safeguarding the security, justice and universal respect for people's rights. The central aim of the universal authority is not only to eliminate a risk of armed conflict, but even to achieve such international political conditions under which all wars could be completely outlawed by international consent. It is beyond any questions that this remark reflects the then conditions of international relations. Of course, they reflect the ongoing Cold War. From further comments of the Council Fathers, it is clear that a universal public authority hasn't been regarded as the main or omnipotent institution soaring somewhere in the center of international relations. A possible establishment of such an authority should be preceded by the agreement of the international centers of power on the basements of the common global security. The authors of the Constitution say nothing about its design or institutional structure, nor they do describe which the highest existing international centers should be involved in a decision-making process or how such a process could be managed. It seems to be quite strange that blessed Paul VI, who succeeded St. John the 23rd, paid no attention to the problem of a global public authority. In despite that, in his encyclical Populorum Progressio, he aimed at issues of an increasingly globalized world of that time. He pointed out these problems. It was nevertheless St. John Paul II who partially reintroduced an idea of global public authority into the Catholic social teaching. In his, you can see it in the message on the occasion of the celebration of the World Day of Peace in 2003, when the Pope rhetorically asked whether the time was ripe for establishing a new constitutional organization of the human family, truly capable of ensuring peace and harmony between peoples. For the Pope, this didn't mean to write the constitution of a global superstate. He didn't imagine such a strong organization. Unfortunately, his description of the global public authority was too vague and less clear than in the case of John the 23rd. He didn't offer a more detailed description of the structure and competencies of such international authority. The positive attitude to the rules and principles of the United Nations suggests that a gradual transformation of United Nations that should aspire to this global authority. This was appreciated by Benedict XVI in his encyclical Caritas in Veritate. He talked about the reform of the United Nations organization and likewise of economic institutions and international finance, so that the concept of the became more trustful. Moreover, Benedict XVI devoted at least 2 paragraphs to the issue of the global political authority, while talking about globalization and its governance, which must be marked by subsidiarity He emphasizes that such a process requires a certain type of authority. The Pope stresses that such an authority should be prevented from endangering or infringing, breaking freedoms of the particular states. On the contrary, he says nothing about who should have the right to monitor and control the authority. He even doesn't mean or if there should be a higher entity over the global public authority. And if so, who should be such an entity? It should be United Nations or a global hegemonic leader such as the United States, or should such an entity or actor or player responsible in a democratic sense? The Pope doesn't answer these questions. He doesn't ask these questions. He is calling for other rethinking of the international structure that he offered in 2009 encyclical, which is reflected of the United Nations encyclical. The Pope repeats the principles and bases on the legacy of his predecessor. I will switch from the Benedict XVI's ideas influenced by the global economic crisis, which was during the time of the encyclical. I will go to the most important documents that actually elaborated or presented the most elaborated form of the global public political authority. This document is not a Pope document, but Curiálny or Dicaster Vatican document. It's the note from the year was published by the Pope by Justitia et Fax in 2011 in several languages. The note has a long name, although it's quite short. The global public authority have a realistic structure and should be set up gradually. It brings the best contours of the social Catholic teaching. We don't know the authors of this note, but we believe that it's a team of experts from different disciplines, neo-Keynesian economic orientation. According to them, the global political authority should have realistic structure and be set up gradually. The authors unanimously agree with the previous papal teachings that such an authority should not be established without broad consensus of the states, member states of the United Nations. Each country is expected to express its own readiness to be subjected to the authorities' decisions. It seems that the establishment will be or should be preceded by a preliminary phase of consultations from which a legitimated institution will emerge that is in a position to be an effective guide and at the same time can allow each country to express and pursue its own particular good. So we see the general common good, commune novum, but also the accent to particular good of each country. Otherwise, the authority will lack the effectiveness and legitimacy. The note says that the authority should not be established by force, coercion or violence. Its strength, power, should be based on a spontaneous consent of the world community. The governments of the world, of the countries, are expected to respect naturally and willingly such global authority. In addition, these governments should not serve the world, authority unconditionally, but such an authority should put itself at the service of the various member countries according to the principle of subsidiarity. The principle of subsidiarity is considered very important or very crucial, which is the main principle of the Catholic social teaching. Together with the principle of solidarity, common good and human dignity. The global public authority The question arises, however, which areas would fall within the competence of a global authority. From the Catholic social teaching perspective, it seems that the world political system should take the form of a global confederation. The Catholic social teaching doesn't provide a precise answer to the question, what would be the institutional form of such a confederation? What is more serious is that the Church documents say nothing about the role of a global authority in such a world confederation. We can read in the note that the global authority should develop gradually on the basis of the already functioning principles of multilateralism, not only on a diplomatic level, but also and above all in relation to programs for sustainable development and peace. These terms have already been mentioned during this conference, and some speakers actually criticized these terms. Apparently, democracy is not a principle that the Catholic social teaching considers worthy to pay attention, which I think is really worthy to pay attention to. And this is everything I wanted to say, and I'd like to thank you for your attention. Thank you very much. Thank Dr. Sekerák, and this day will be finished by Dr. Míčka with his paper. I called my paper Peace and Community of Nations, Security and Unity of Mankind in Gaudium and Spes. I'd like to talk about two things, about the peace and war at present, and also about the question of global governance. Marián was talking about. We talk about, I'm more critical to this concept, so I try to find other impulses in Francis, the Pope Francis, which could contribute to this thinking. A few historical remarks. The Council era is an era of fundamental and revolutionary changes and challenges which must be coped with the international field. The period of the Cold War, nuclear conflict threat, ideology of atheistic communism, fundamental differences between rich and poor countries, emancipation of developing countries. The issue of international relations and related problems is discussed primarily in the last chapter of the Pastoral Constitution Gaudium et Spes, especially chapter 5, the fostering of peace and the promotion of a community of nations. Of the 5 selected pressing problems of the times, this chapter is the most extensive. It is worth mentioning that this chapter was the least consensual of all documents in terms of debating time, middle and final voting of the present bishops, as indicated in the records of the final voting and witnessed by Professor Skalický. The balanced text of the chapter, the fostering of peace and the promotion of community of nations, is a result of colorful and fierce debates among the Council Fathers, whose views on the individual issues as well as the character of the whole document differed. In the debate of the Fathers, the Council sensitively reckoned to what extent it should grant or not grant the more radical views of many issues. Similarly, a complex debate was led concerning the extent to which this devilish communist ideology should be explicitly condemned. A very strong, though eventually answered voice. Other views could also be heard concerning the manner and extent of condemning war as such and the extent of the Church identification with pacifism. A part of the Council Fathers were for unconditional condemnation of war and nuclear weapons, with reference to the incapability of traditional just war criteria in the context of nuclear conflict threat. Others, especially English-speaking bishops, called for wise discrimination and warned against immoderate pacifism. The resulting text condemns war with sufficient force, yet at the same time against pacifism confirms the legitimacy of military service and the right of just defense. What happened since that time? The following 50 years up to the present have brought innumerable events, historical changes and other political and economic factors which have changed the world in terms of international relations. We can't mention all of them, but for example, only from the point of view of population, the number of inhabitants of the earth has more than doubled. In 1965, it was inhabited by not quite 3.5 billion people. In 2015, there are approximately 7.25 billion inhabitants on Earth. Global political and economic transformations are not easy to describe briefly, but they are marked by the phenomenon of globalization, also additionally strengthened by the disintegration of bipolarity. In terms of security, the fall of communism led to a substantial decrease in risk of threat of extensive nuclear conflict, but there arose a great number of conflicts generating conflicts of tension, some superpowers. There are also appeared local conflicts and erupted the phenomenon of Islamic terrorism. Firstly, a war, then the global governments. As indicated above, the classical doctrine of just war, cultivated and developed in the context of Christian ethical tradition for many centuries, was at the time of the Council facing the threat of nuclear war found inapplicable. The whole following tradition of church documents, especially social encyclicals, does not speak on the topics of possible criteria of just war. The threat of nuclear war led church representatives to believe that rather than reflect on the conditions and criteria of just war, it is necessary for fear of the great risk of nuclear war to eliminate the potential of conflict generation at all costs, since the potential of nuclear weapons to extensive and uncontrollable devastation did not make it possible to stipulate the limits of just defense. Of course, the encyclicals that came after the Second Vatican also paid intensive attention to peace. For example, Paul VI in Populorum Progressio strongly identifies the possibilities of reaching world peace with economic development of poor countries in spirit of the motto "Development, the new name for peace." Paul VI also established World Day of Peace and in 1968 founded the tradition of the early messages of popes for the celebration of the World Day of Peace, which bring urgent calls to peace as well as valuable incentives to ethical evaluation of war. On the other hand, it is necessary to perceive that the popes do not consider it to be their task to evaluate individual war conflicts, to specify or debate the criteria of just war, but are in the role of spiritual shepherds calling for the elimination of war conflicts of any kind, including those that could be considered just. The moral criteria for judging the legitimacy of war and its character are primarily the guidance for responsible political authorities making particular political decisions, as confirmed by the new Catechism of the Catholic Church. It is, after a long time, the first official church document enumerating and reflecting in that article some traditional moral criteria of just war. But the debate of Catholic ethicists and committed Catholic laypersons, developed especially in connection with the controversial Second Iraq War, shows that it is not easy to reach some fundamental agreement concerning the evaluation of the nature and ethical dimension of particular conflicts. We can not render the complexity of the contemporary debate over just war theory and its connections with the development of international law and changes of character of war conflicts in this paper. Let us focus on some interesting incentives from the newer church documents, which stimulate and affect the debate in some way. The era of Pope John Paul II was marked by a real as well as symbolical watershed in the character of world security threats. The terrorist attack on the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001. Of course, the Pope immediately rejects terrorist attacks, and similarly he does in the following message for the World Day Peace, 2002. The following text shows that the Pope considers terrorism to be a specific political and military strategy. From the moral point of view, he considers it to be a true crime against humanity. He confirms that here exists, therefore, a right to defend oneself against terrorism, though in observation of moral and legal principles in selection of both targets and means. Reacting to that religious rules of such type of terrorism, the Pope says, consequently, no religious leader can condone terrorism and much less preach it. It is a profanation of religion to declare oneself a terrorist in the name of God, to do violence to others in his name. In the message for the year 2004, John Paul II, in the 8th article entitled The Deadly Scourge of Terrorism, speaks of the problem of fighting against terrorism in broader context. He suggests that the international law established after World War II, warranted by the United Nations, where the subjects are the individual nation-states, doesn't provide satisfactory instruments for maintaining security in the world and fighting globalized terrorism. The Pope in the message further directly calls for an updating of international law and reform of the United Nations, which would thereby adapt to new conditions and finally become an effective instrument of world security. The text of the message, face to face with terrorism, grasps the fact that the character of war has fundamentally changed in terms of the war participants and their symmetry. Further, the Pope also relativizes the earlier stresses of economic roots and conflicts as seen, for example, by Paul VI.
Pohroma terorismu mimo to vyžaduje hlubší úvahu o etických hranicích týkajících se použití dnešních nástrojů pro ochranu.
In terms of just war theory, it's interesting to read Benedict and his message for the World Day of Peace 2007, where he says, moreover, the scourge of terrorism demands a profound reflection on the ethical limits restricting the use of modern methods of guaranteeing internal security. Increasingly, wars are not declared, especially when they are initiated by terrorist groups, determined to attain their ends by any means available. In the face of the disturbing events of recent years, states cannot fail to recognize the need to establish clearer rules to counter effectively the dramatic decline that we are witnessing. The present Pope Francis only had occasion to publish 2 messages for the World Day of Peace so far, and in which he does not discuss particular war conflicts but topics of more general character, in which, following the example of Paul VI, he again links peace and the development of nations and even calls for the disarmament of all parties. Although the Pope doesn't speak on particular conflicts, he does so fairly strongly at various other occasions. For example, in the homily during Mass at the military graveyard Repudiclia, he condemns the lunacy of wars as well as apathy towards them, the causes of which he considers to be greed, intolerance, power, ambitions, geopolitical interests and plans, and even the interests of arms producers. He speaks of the present security situation and local conflicts of the Third World War. On some occasions, he mentions particular conflicts and wars, for example in Urbi et Orbi, and he calls for peace, of course. Pope Francis, like previous popes, doesn't provide much material for the principles and rules of just war. Some of his statements are judged by critics as to be too idealistic. For example, a certain rhetoric reduction of the causes of war, like pride, greed, arms-producing lobby, the idealistic call for the general disarmament, and his excessive emphasis on the economic dimension of conflicts following the trend of Paul VI. However, this rhetoric must be viewed primarily as a contribution to the debate over particular aspects of just war theory, but as effort at the normative development of a global ethics of peace, mentioned by Bernhard Sutter, for example. In the difficult decision-making of political leaders, how to eliminate the danger associated, for example, with the current formation of so-called Islamic State, the religious doctrine doesn't give us instructions, and even among politicians of Christian orientation differ in their suggestions. Some request a definitive liquidation of Islamic State, others suggest to a certain respect for its existence if it's state-forming and not too dangerous for the outside world. Another issue Gaudium et Spes tried to address was the general nature of the international order and the possible role of some sort of world authority. While in Gaudium et Spes and the wider tradition of the Church's thinking, there is usually pronounced the respect for identity and sovereignty of nations, there echoed interesting voices to some kind of direct political uniting of the world. Secretary Cardinal Ottaviani, in his speech, says the Council should express the wish that all the world nations became members of one global republic beyond all national particularism in order to realize Christ's peace in Christ's kingdom. The idea of global public authority is in Gaudium et Spes mentioned as a future prospect, but not in the spirit of the World Republic, as Ottaviani mentioned or wished, but only to a limited extent as an institution securing peace and human rights. The Council, in its approved text, apparently neither accepted the idea of a global republic nor the full concept of a global political authority with economic, social and cultural powers as developed by Pope John Pacem in Terris 2 years earlier. The idea of political unity of the world is not new, and in the course of the history of the Christian era has appeared many times in various forms, and in various measures of inspiration by Christian universalism. The idea of global political authority was introduced in the social teaching of the Church by Pope John XXIII in the encyclical Pacem in Terris, where he says, consequently the moral order itself demands the establishment of some such general form of public authority. This concept of global authority proposed by Pope John XXIII, partially received by the Council, was not much developed or even recalled in later social encyclicals, which is an interesting signal. Only in Message for the Celebration of the World Day Peace 23 in Article 6, a new international moral order, John Paul II comments on the thinking of John XXIII in its matter, and at the same time stresses that new international order is first of all a matter of morality, not a global political organization. But let there be no misunderstanding. This doesn't mean writing the constitution of a global superstate. The idea of a world political authority is again emphasized by Benedict XVI in his encyclical Caritas in Veritate, where, in connection with the urgency of the current economic crisis, he speaks of a higher degree of international order which would govern globalization, world economy redistribution of wealth, protection of the environment and migration movements. At the same time, he also sees fundamental risks in the concentration of political power, which is why he elsewhere stresses that the global authority must be organized in a subsidiary way, in a multi-degree and polyarchic manner of globalization, so he is closer to a non-authority structure.
Globální světové autority rozvíjení podrobněji bych vynechal, ale zaměřil bych se na některé impulzy ze strany papeže Františka.
I'd like to concentrate on Pope Francis, who speaks about negative phenomenon of globalization. We can interpret a sort of stronger voice for stronger autonomy of the states, complementarity. For example, during the in-flight press conference from the Philippines to Rome, Francis expressed his idea of globalization. I'm quoting, "Peoples should not lose their freedom. Each people has its own culture, its own history, but when conditions are imposed by colonizing empires, they seek to make these peoples lose their own identity and create uniformity. This is spherical globalization. All points are equidistant from the center. It is important to globalize, but not like the sphere, but rather like the polyhedron, namely that each people, every part, preserves its identity without being ideologically colonized." These and other statements seem to show that Pope Francis doesn't harbor much trust in a diversified conception of globalization, respecting the autonomy and identity of nations. In his encyclical Laudato Si, he doesn't develop the issue of the nature and assessment of the international order as such. He is speaking about a revision of the ethics of international relations, particularly with regard to the debt of developed countries to poor countries and elimination of poverty. At the same time, he calls for strengthening the international institutions, but again in relation to the government of autonomous nations, and also in terms of return to the supremacy of politics over economic forces. Francis's concept of international relation is evidenced by his recent speech of the 17th United Nations General Assembly in New York, where he highlights United Nations as meritorious institution of international law, which has its imperfections, but can guarantee a secure and happy future of the coming generations. He emphasizes legal instruments limiting global power, risky influence of nationalist or vice versa falsely universalist ideologies, and simultaneously he warns against building an all-power elite. In conclusion, with respect to the conception of the character of international relations, as such, the voice of the Catholic Church is in general a voice promoting a certain cosmopolitan perspective based on the idea of equality, dignity of all human beings, and a certain unity of humanity. Even though the social teaching of the Church knows the concepts of sovereignty and rights of nations, it doesn't conceive them as wholly absolute, and supports also supranational forms of cooperation and organization, especially the idea of international law and universal human rights. Even though in the sphere of international relations, the sometimes too idealistic and proclaiming rhetoric of the Catholic Church may be recognized as inadequate or naive, it is, on the other hand, necessary to emphasize its prophetic, critical and normative significance. By its activity in the international field of the Catholic Church can balance out the limited perspectives of the individual states expressed by national interests, taking a global and cosmopolitan perspectives and enlarging the normative spaces in international relations. One area of tension between the Church's view of international relations and the view of individual national states will be obviously a very open view on the issue of migration, which is currently very hot. But even here, it is useful to look at what exactly the Church documents say on the subject. I chose an extract. Richer nations should receive a foreigner who seeks security and essential things for life he cannot find in his own country. Political authorities responsible for the common good can adjust their immigration laws to various legal conditions, especially in terms of immigrants' obligations towards the country that receives them. Immigrants have to respect with gratitude the material, spiritual heritage of the country that hosts them, obey its laws and contribute to its costs.
Slyšeli jsme 3 další úžasné příspěvky a já doufám, že v takhle pokročilé denní době máte ještě sílu položit nějaké dotazy. To znamená, teď následuje diskuze a já otevírám fórum pro vaše případné dotazy. Nevidím žádné dotazy. Všechno bylo jasné, tak já možná taky se zeptám našich přednášejících, jestli třeba mají nějaký dotaz navzájem na sebe. No, je tady otázka.
Marián and also Roman heard about a global governing authority, a global government, and that in the documents it is not specified, or the church does not say anything further about this global authority. But is it actually a defect? Is the church supposed to, or the Pope, is he supposed to say very clearly who should govern, or what should be the form of this government, this global government? I think that is not, in my opinion, that is not perhaps the role of the church. Otherwise, it will bring more conflict only. Just an opinion. So if you have something to respond.
Shaji se ptá, zda tady je vůbec profes autorizován vypracovat nebo přinést nějaký koncept globální vlády a jestli by to nebylo naopak spíš konfliktní od něj něco takového očekávat.
Co si o tom myslí Marián?
Tak to je těžká otázka. Jak jsme viděli, že jo, z toho, co jsme říkali, tak samozřejmě nedává konkrétní rysy, ani to není jeho úkolem a probíhá ta debata i nezávisle na papeži, že jo, ohledně vývoje mezinárodních vztahů, jo. Takže těžko říct. Já osobně jsem vůči tomu skeptičtější, když chápu, že ta idea obsažena v té sociální nauce, možná bych zmínil myšlenku Jacquesa Mariténa z jeho knihy Člověka stát, kde on se přimlouvá za jakousi vizi světového státu, světové federace, ale říká, že ta perspektiva hodně vzdálená, hodně budoucí, protože právě předpokládá to, co ostatně zaznívá v těch textech, že tedy je tam žádný ten souhlas všech národů. A k tomu nějak zralá zásadně není a nějaká autoritářská forma by přinesla zase jiné informace a tak dále. To je můj pohled jako idea, jako perspektiva.
Idea or perspective of is possible, but the concept, when I watch the reality and the future, I am afraid a little bit that this concept could be misused. So I'm a little bit afraid, and I don't think it will work. In my opinion, it's evident that the Pope, John Paul XXIII and today's Francis, actually resigned to construct a real form of a future institution, and I think that it's a conscious resignation, because the Catholic social teaching is aimed not to give a recipe or instructions, which was mentioned by encyclicals, but the prime task or aim is the salvation of souls. That's the alpha and omega of the legacy and the sense of religion in the world. In spite of that, they offer a sort of instruction or a sort of form or guidance or vademecum for man in today's world, for community of nations. And I think that present just draft form, that how the community should look like, that it's just a contribution of the popes, how to reach the common good, and simultaneously individual salvation of each individual being. So I think in a long-term perspective of the future, we cannot expect any constructions of real forms of the global authority, although I expressed why it's not like that. It's understandable that concrete forms or guidances are absent, and I think that in the future will be missing. There will be absence of such concrete forms of global governance organizations. Are there any other questions, or should we ask each other? I'd like to ask Professor if there is a solution, economy of community which was created in Brazil in the 70s, during the contrast of very rich people and people living in the favelas slums. And I know that in some universities they study, in Sofia in Italy, they study the economy of community, that the profit is divided into three parts. One supports the company, one supports solidarity with the poorest, and one is divided into among the employees. it begins to work. Do you think this is the solution for the future? Because as I see the Constitution, Gaudium et Spes, I see that it's a constitution for creating communities, how to go out and create and see the joys and fears of the people living near each other. They go together to job. If this is for the future, a solution of these global economical problems, that's my question.
As I understood this model from Brazil or there, surely there can be different models, and there should be. But at the same time, this is surely an inspiring model. If it works well and good, and in another country it may be working in another way, or other models will be there. Various initiatives are there. But at the same time, although the church speaks about solidarity with the poor, it doesn't, just like the global governance, it doesn't give a concrete model. Just like that, the church does not say anything very precise how much is to be shared or how this community or solidarity should be practiced. Because then there may be perhaps more reactions or even rejections. The church says that there should be solidarity. The poor should not be forgotten. Or the work or profit should not be the focus. The laborer or the person should be the focus. And more than profit, there should be ethics. So various models. This basic Christian, basic communities, or in the context of the church, basic Christian communities, and in countries like India, where other religions also are there, or where they are majority, people speak about basic human communities. Instead of basic Christian communities, we speak about basic human communities. But the difficulty is that in some small villages or some small parts, it may work. It's very difficult to go forward with the kind of competition promoted by globalization. That's why the profit and also the competition and consumerism, they are presented as the ideal. Needs are created, so people are easily attracted by that. There's a difficulty, but surely these are good models.
I would like to ask a question. We are solving global things, planetary things, and we have an example here of the example of living together of Slovaks and Czechs. I'd like to use this moment, and I'd like to ask if Dr. Sekerák has a feeling that the division make us closer or make us more distant from each other, the nations of Slovaks and Czechs. Thank you for the question. I will be brief, not because of time, but because I think that my question is clear. I think that it makes us closer. From the point of view of my generation, we get closer. Is there any other question you would like to ask? I don't know if it's a really bad idea at the end, but it's for Shaji, Indian theologian. I analyzed encyclical Laudato Si, and Francis and his speaks about poverty, the community for the poor. It's a very strong idea. On the other side, when I analyze the references to the encyclical, to other local church documents, we can see that his his thinking is influenced by Latin American experience. I think that most poverty is concentrated in Southern Asia and Southern Africa. The Latin American poverty, I don't want to minimize or in question of numbers, when I looked at the statistics, the Pope's national homeland is on the level of Croatia or Latvia, which means the European countries. Maybe there are other problems, but these are countries that are able to conquer poverty, actually manage the poverty. So I'm surprised that I missed the voice from these churches, strong churches in Asia or in Africa. So there are two references talking about the ecological question.
Okay, surely I think Latin America is, when we consider in the context of the church, surely that reference is important, but at the same time, I think that this is only given as a model for an example for the issue. But at the same time, the global south, usually we speak about the global south, as he told. And there the poverty is a concern. And it is really connected with the ecology. I didn't elaborate that section much, especially in many countries like India. We also speak about the tribals in India. Tribals, the indigenous people of different areas or the states. Thomas may know that better, who has visited India. For them, their idea of identity is really connected with the land, with the ecology. And for them, poverty and ecological destruction, all these are very much connected. So in different ways it has to be presented actually, it has to be dealt with. This ecological destruction, poverty, all these. So it's not merely the economic poverty or just the harm done to a particular area of the land. All these are very much connected. I do not know in the encyclical there is scope to deal with all these different issues, because in India the ecological destruction has also another dimension. It is very cultural and it's also about the very identity and existence of certain peoples, especially the tribal people. For them, harm done to ecology means their existence or identity is lost. And surely, if that is the question of this Latin America, Africa, all these are very important, but they are also different.
Odlišné. Thank you for the answer, for the questions. Anybody else? I'd like to thank you. Thank you for your lectures. And let's applaud to them, please.